The fundamentals of my disillusionment when it comes to the drug war and the drug problem is not that you can't reduce the usage via government action. Like there isn't an ability to aspire to making any progress. It's the realization that when the state moved out and when the federal government stopped getting involved with, and we had a problem under Purdue, and that the regulators were basically asleep at the wheel in the opioid epidemic. But what's happened now that it's become incredibly difficult to get opioids in the first place is that the black market has moved in to supply the shortages that the state actually had, and why Portland has become difficult, in that there are people that are literally injecting in the streets of the city itself, and it's become unsafe in that kind of way, and it's not family friendly. What we really should be doing is a completely different approach. In effect, we need regulators that are not as asleep at the wheel as the ones that were in power when it came to, the problem that we had in the first place, which, it's horrifying that we just let them go without any real intervention. But see, prohibition, I think my biggest problem when it comes to this menace, like Big Sis is like, no, they reduced alcohol use under the prohibition policy, but it's just like, the problem with all of that is that all of the drugs have got the drug menace. Like, one of the things that was the big deal about like moonshine back in the former era was that occasionally moonshine would get cut in or created in an inappropriate fashion, and it would end up blinding people because it was mixed together in the wrong way. Well, that history isn't repeating exactly, but it's rhyming with the issues that we're having when it comes to the opioid problem, and that it's not unheard of to see the drugs mixed together with some very caustic types of things, with paint thinner and everything else, and people are taking that shit and literally injecting it into their veins. And in the old days, it was heroin. Today, it's fentanyl. It's moved on to a much more potent version of opioid. But that's what happens too when you wage a war on the drugs. I mean, one of the things that happens when you're trying to smuggle drugs across the border, into the hands of would-be users, is that the way that you get through the border is the same way that the same phenomenon that we're seeing happen when it comes to our phones and our electronics. You try to get as much potency in as small of a space as possible, because the consequences of getting caught with it are so high that it literally maximizes profits. And so computers get smaller, but drugs tend to get smaller too, to compartmentalize, to get past and to penetrate our attempts to enforce regulations about them. That's one of their tactics, is that they start shrinking in size and trying to pack as much potency as they can into a smaller and smaller space. This is one of the effects of our combat on it, and it's an unintended consequence that ends up happening because of the fact that there are people that are so willing, to try to break the law and to push it into our territory as far as the country is concerned. All up and down and through South America and in South American countries, you have these people that, their economies have been, stripped down to the point in which, the most effective way and the most like realistic path to success is to sell drugs to, you know, us as a country. And if you get in the cartel's way, and the drug cartels in South America, they will literally kill you, just for getting in their way. They literally, they will not tolerate anybody that ends up being an impediment to them at all. And so, the scale of my disillusionment when it comes to this is that when the state pulled out, the criminals moved in. You know, the thing is that when the state pulls out, you can count on the criminals moving in. That's what happens every time. I mean, like I said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does have a very strong history, a strong, tendency to rhyme, so to speak. And when the legal versions and the ways to obtain these drugs in a legal fashion disappeared, what happened quite naturally is that people spotted a shortage and an opportunity and started to exploit the situation for everything it was worth. Things that are confusing about it is that they're cutting cocaine also as well with fentanyl, which is a little bit confusing to a lot of people on the basis of the fact that, like, why would you mix cocaine with something that's even stronger? You would want to cut it with something even weaker, from that, it just seems to be pushing in the wrong direction, and people are having to get drug testing kits to test for fentanyl when they want to just do cocaine. As a consequence of all of it, everything has gotten worse. Everything has moved, and I'm trying to get her to realize this, rationally speaking, and trying to get my sister to acknowledge this and to realize that every time the government tries to clamp down on supply, this is what's going to happen. It's an inevitable consequence of the government, doing it. And it's true, back during, the oxytocin or whatever it was, oxycontin, like, with Purdue, this opioid, I'm trying to remember exactly what we opioid. I mean, yeah, they became pill farms and everything, and Purdue and everything, it was killing people and everything that were going through that, and, they avoided it. But, my big thing about all this is that that was an example of the regulator being completely asleep at the switch, you know what I mean? Like, if we had just enforced the laws that were actually on the books, it might have gone a little bit better, but nobody was really guarding. We had allowed the foxes to control the hen house, and that was one of the big problems with Purdue's control over things. What it needed was better oversight, because we had oversight. We had the ability to engage in oversight, we just didn't use the powers that we had to, effectively regulate the problem back during the Purdue era. And so my rage about all this, though, is that, the truth of the matter is that when essentially drugs move from the regulated market into the unregulated case, we had what was a situation in which it was regulated, but it was effectively unofficially deregulated because of the fact that nobody was actually enforcing the regulations that were actually on the books during the Purdue era. But now we've moved into a truly unregulated market because because people that are selling drugs think of it, in this kind of way where, if you're a dealer, you're thinking something along the lines of, if I report anything to the government about what I'm doing, then they're going to know what I'm up to. So even trying to obey some of these regulations would just open a door to government oversight of me selling drugs. So I'm not going to even try to conform to the regulations that are laid down on the books. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut my heroin or my fentanyl with, paint thinner, and I'm going to, and I don't mean cut exactly because that's got very specific terminology, but what I do mean is that during the process of converting it from the flower into the opium itself, they're going to use really bad chemicals, in putting things together. Like, some of them will even be literally paint thinner. And then there's no process in which that stuff actually gets purified and removed from the end product, which means that people are literally, injecting all kinds of crap directly into their veins with, the opioid problems. I mean, like, all of the drugs got worse as a consequence of handing it over to criminals in the black market, and so the harm has been increased, substantially by it being in the hands of criminals. I mean, at least, my dad had an idea when it came to all of this, and he was always a very strong advocate for, there being clinics that people could go to essentially use. that was his vision, and it would keep them off the streets as well and from using on the streets of this country, and so I remain sort of pissed off at Betty for her time in campaigning against Measure 101 because the vote for it was kind of just a vote for the idea that the prohibition policy had failed, and I think that one of the most effective means of showing you that isn't with opioids, but with MDMA. We no parent in their right mind wants their kid using drugs, but we know that there's a certain demographic of people that are going to experiment with it when it comes to the chance. And so, I'm with anyone's child, and one of the big things that sucks is that I'm an American, but I'm very much in support of this British institution, and people always have this kind of thinking where they're thinking that America is somehow unique. And I mean, yes, England is a far more homogenous society than England, but how does that have make any real difference when it comes to this problem? And so there was a 15-year-old girl, and it's really really tragic, what happened to her, but her daughter, um, Martha, you know, Anne Marie Cockburn, by the way, and her daughter was 15 years old when she took MDMA, and she bought it from a street dealer. And Anne Marie Cockburn noticed that, her child took a massive, massive dose of the stuff. I mean, it wasn't, y- you know, she took a huge dose. She took enough for 5 people, per the conference. And the truth of the matter is that that's assuming like 200 milligrams. So she had 91% pure, but I kind of feel like that one's the estimated thing that they're saying, because it's still what the dose is that's more meaningful than the purity. But we can see from the details for him, she you know uh, Martha Fernbeck and a friend bought a plastic satchel with crystallized MDMA, and it was a gram for $40. Her her online history revealed that she had meticulously researched the risk of the drugs and opted to buy its most expensive variant, assuming the better the quality it was, the safer it would be. And that was kind of the 15-year-old's logic in this. And one of the myriad of ramifications of the Nixon administration's hardline stance has meant that buying drugs is fraught and a risk-laden business. Users do not know what they are taking. In Martha's case, the better quality meant greater purity. She had no idea that her batch of 91% pure was 91% pure compared with an average street level of 28%. Around lunchtime on the 20th of July, and let me get the year, this article came out of July of 2013. It's because the article is now out of date in that kind of way, but this is the martyr, so to speak, that kind of put me in this. Around lunchtime on July 20th, in 2013, as from what it appears, she took her half a gram, and within 2 hours was dead, and inducing cardiac failure. I really feel, reading this though, that it wouldn't have mattered, that it was 91% pure when you're talking about taking a full half gram of this stuff. Like, MDMA is just not meant to be consumed in that high of doses in the first place. And people, for someone that was of her size, a good dose would have been like, you know 100 mg basically. She just wasn't big enough to need that, or of enough body mass to, need, for a dose that would be enjoyable enough to need, that massive that she took, and she took 5 times what she needed to, and the response of her mother, Anne Marie Cockburn, was unusual. She refused to blame her daughter, her friends, or even the dealer or the manufacturer. Cockburn was remarkable in that she focused on a greater target, the government. It quickly became obvious that prohibition had had its chance but failed. Martha was nothing more than a sacrificial lamb under prohibition. The question is, how many more Marthas do we have to take before we change our approach? It's not acceptable to allow the risk to continue. The risk of drug use under prohibition were articulated again after that when Rio Andrew, apparently oblivious to the strength of the drug he take, it died apparently oblivious to the strength of the drug he took. Witnesses saw Rio from Notting Hill, West London, drinking beer laced with the so-called party drug ketamine. Another partygoer, aged 19, who drank from the same bottle at a rave in Croydon, South London, reportedly ended up in a hospital. The death comes months after ministers reclassified ketamine from Class C to Class B because of its physical and psychological dangers and its enduring popularity. And this was near the anniversary of what happened to Martha in this whole thing. If anybody accuses me of not thinking about the children when it comes to this, it's one of the most heavy thoughts that weighs on my mind when it comes to the drug debate, having watched what Anne Marie put forward. And so, you know, the question in a big way is, do cocaine users, are they really aware of what they're ultimately taking? And do they know that it's been cut with, you know, this stuff? Because many people that are taking these street level drugs have no idea what they're actually taking and consuming and putting inside themselves, and all this. It's kind of like, they come at it from, like, Forrest Gump's idea of, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, and drugs are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, but you should. And that's the big, problem with the current approach. And it's also just that we've handed control of the market to the most unscrupulous fucks humanly fucking imaginable. I mean, it's been a nightmare. And so what I think needs to happen is much like my father, you're tired of all the needles on the streets of Portland. Cool. So am I. I think that what we should do is create clinics for these people to go to use, where the staff will either compel them to clean it up or have janitorial staff that is capable of dealing with hazardous materials to dispose of the needles. We need to create clinics for these people to go to get their drug in the first place. And one of the added benefits of doing things that way is that it keeps these people from having to steal to get their drug in the first place. The big problem with opioids is that we did eventually start cutting them off, and it's become short. We have a hugely short supply of opioids now, and so the only people that a huge number of people are able to get, their opioids from is from, the black market, and that's literally the worst place to get it from. Of all the people that you could turn to when it comes to getting heroin, it would make the most sense to get it from the pharmacies and get it from, doctors that were, in the regulatory structure that I'm talking about, required to maintain oversight over their patient and watch them and monitor them. I really don't think aspirationally it's achievable to, get everybody off of this stuff, but I do think that we should probably aspire to reduce deaths that are, caused as a result of using it. But there's a whole structure of unnecessary damage that is done to people's lives, as a result of the persecution of them by the state under its, criminalization regime as addicts of this stuff. These people need compassion. Drug users are fucking people too. They need to be put in, a clinic that, gives them some place to go so that they're not literally on the streets disrupting things. making it unsafe for people to traverse the streets of Portland on foot, you know? What we need is a registered addicts program, and like I said, the best way to go about it is to get some people that are literally that were literally recovered addicts working at the clinic from the community that people know, because drug users are gonna be naturally suspicious of the authorities, and so you need somebody that they know, you know, at the street level to, be the one that starts to go and do the hard work of actually gathering the names of the people that are addicted. You create a registry, you get to know, you systematically figure out who the addicts are, and then you have the pharmaceutical companies give them a controlled dose, you know? That's the best I think that we can hope for. It will reduce deaths, it will make the streets safer, and it will basically be the most sane approach that we can have on this. I know in America where we have this idea in our heads that anything that enables is just a, devil, an unthinkable option is insane and it's incredibly difficult to pass, but I think that that is the best possible thing that we can do for that body of people. I think that unfortunately, we have to, you know, contend with reality on its own terms. And that means that, in order to save as many lives as possible and to create as much safety as possible for the population of people that are not part of the problem and are not addicted themselves, this is the best that we can hope for.